Once upon a time in a small village there lived a widow named Agatha and her son, Wilson. Agatha had lost her husband when Wilson was just a toddler. Left with little more than their small farmhouse and the fields they tended, Agatha devoted herself tirelessly to providing for her son. Despite the hardships, Agatha was determined to give Wilson the best education possible. She worked long hours in the fields, often taking on additional tasks for neighbors to earn extra money. Many nights, she would skip meals to ensure there was enough food for Wilson. The village whispered about Agatha's determination and Wilson's potential, but few understood the depth of their sacrifices. Wilson's schooling was a constant struggle. On several occasions, he was sent home due to unpaid fees. Each time, Agatha's heart broke anew, but she refused to let despair take hold. Instead, she worked harder, taking on extra jobs in neighboring farms and households, doing whatever it took to earn enough money to send Wilson back to school. Through sheer determination and endless sacrifices, Agatha saw Wilson through primary school, then secondary school, and finally to university. Her love for her son fueled her resilience, her dreams intertwined with his as he pursued his education with unwavering determination. With high hope, Wilson found himself standing on the bustling streets of Lagos, the city of dreams and opportunities. Armed with his hard-earned degree and a heart full of determination, he was ready to carve out a future that would not only fulfill his ambitions but also provide for his beloved mother, Agatha. But months passed to years, filled with job applications, interviews, and moments of uncertainties. Each time, he walked into those gleaming office buildings with hope in his heart and confidence in his qualifications. Yet, time and again, he faced the disappointment of rejection. Wilson sat alone in his small, rented apartment in Lagos, the city that had once seemed full of promise, now a labyrinth of disappointment and despair. The rejection emails and the polite dismissals from interviews echoed in his mind, taunting him with their finality. Despite his best efforts, he couldn't seem to break through the barrier keeping him from securing a stable job. After years of striving, hoping for a better life, Wilson found himself back in the familiar embrace of his village, his dreams of a successful career shattered. Each rejection letter had been a blow to his confidence, a stark reminder of the harsh realities beyond the idyllic countryside where he grew up. I thought my degree would open doors for me, that all those years of studying and working so hard would pay off. But every rejection letter feels like a weight on my chest. It's like I'm back to square one, Mama, and I don't know how to move forward anymore, Wilson complained to his mother. As Wilson poured out his heart to Agatha about his struggles in the city, Agatha listened with a mixture of empathy and concern etched on her weathered face. She felt every bit of her son's pain, his disappointments echoing in her own heart. Agatha reached out and gently clasped Wilson's hand in hers, her touch a comforting anchor in the storm of his emotions. Everything will be all right, she comforts her son, but please, stay here with me. Join me in working on people's farmlands, helping out with household chores in the village. It's not what you had planned, but it will keep us going while we wait for luck to shine on your applications. After a month of working alongside Agatha in the village, Wilson found himself wrestling with a deep-seated frustration that gnawed at his spirit day after day. The routine of farm work and household chores, while grounding and necessary, couldn't dispel the lingering sense of unfulfilled potential that haunted him. Back in the bustling heart of Lagos, Wilson felt a mix of anticipation and trepidation as he navigated familiar streets that seemed both welcoming and daunting. One morning, as Wilson navigated through the city streets on his renewed job hunt, his attention was abruptly drawn to a familiar face in the crowd. It was Tony, his former course mate from university, the same Tony who had shared late-night study sessions and celebrated small victories with him during their academic years. Drawing closer, Wilson's recognition was confirmed as Tony turned, his face lighting up with a broad grin as he spotted Wilson approaching. "Wilson, is that really you?" They hugged and exchanged pleasantries. "Tony, I can't believe it's you. You're looking great," Wilson exclaimed, a genuine smile spreading across his face. Tony's curiosity about Wilson's current endeavors led him to inquire, "So, Wilson, what have you been into these days?" Wilson paused briefly, contemplating how to encapsulate the recent chapters of his life. "Well, after some time back in the village helping out my mom, I've been focused on finding a job here in Lagos. It's been a journey, to say the least." As their conversation deepened, Tony nodded thoughtfully, his expression turning reflective as he shared his own experiences. "You know, Wilson, I've been through a similar journey myself. After graduation, I faced countless rejections and setbacks. It was disheartening. But then, just when I was at my lowest point, I stumbled upon a job opportunity that truly changed everything for me." "Tony, what kind of job do you do now?" Wilson asked eagerly, his words coming out in a rush. "I'm really tired of feeling like the world's against me. How can I be a part of something like what you found?" With a mild smile, "Why don't we take a stroll? I have my car parked nearby. Let's clear our heads a bit." Tony replied Wilson without answering his questions. They drove through the bustling streets of Lagos, with Wilson occasionally stealing glances at Tony's composed demeanor and the way he effortlessly navigated the city's chaotic traffic. Soon, they arrived at a gated community, and Tony smoothly maneuvered his car into the driveway of an impressive mansion. Wilson's eyes widened as he took in the sight of the magnificent building, its architecture speaking of elegance and prosperity. "Tony, is this your house?" Wilson asked, unable to hide his astonishment. Tony chuckled softly, a hint of pride in his voice. "Yeah, Wilson, this is where I live." As Wilson admired Tony's impressive mansion, a mix of admiration and longing stirred within him. He couldn't help but wonder how Tony had achieved such success and luxury. Sensing an opportunity to understand more, Wilson hesitantly asked, "Tony, how can I be part of all this? I mean, your success and everything." Tony paused for a moment, his expression thoughtful as he considered how much to reveal. He valued Wilson's friendship and understood his honest desire for change, yet the intricacies of his journey weren't something easily shared. "Wilson, my friend," Tony began, his voice measured, "I appreciate your curiosity and your aspirations. But trust me, the journey to where I am has its own complexities and challenges. It's not always about the wealth or the luxury." "Tony, please," Wilson pleaded softly but earnestly, "I need to know. I can't continue living like this, struggling day in and day out. I'll do anything to escape this penury, to build a better life for myself and my mother. Please help me understand how you did it." "Wilson," Tony began, his voice steady yet compassionate, "I understand how deeply you desire change, but I need to ask you, are you sure you want to do this?" "Yes, I can do it." Tony nodded, excused himself, and went upstairs to his room. After a few moments, he returned with a black handkerchief in his hand. "Wilson," Tony said solemnly, extending the handkerchief towards him, "take this." Wilson hesitated for a moment, sensing a shift in Tony's demeanor. He accepted the handkerchief cautiously. "Tony, what is this for?" Tony's voice lowered, taking on a mysterious tone. "By holding this handkerchief, you've just sworn an oath to Tanuku, the god of wealth. You must follow the instructions it brings, without hesitation. Failure to do so will result in consequences." Wilson's eyes widened in disbelief. "Consequences? What do you mean?" Tony's expression darkened slightly. "You will be a dead corpse in 2 nights." Wilson's heart raced, unsure whether to take Tony seriously or dismiss it as a bizarre joke. "Tony, this isn't funny." Tony sighed deeply, his eyes conveying a mix of concern and solemnity. He looked directly at Wilson and said, "I wish I was joking, Wilson." Wilson's voice trembled with a mixture of fear and anger as he confronted Tony. "Tony, why didn't you tell me this was the case before? Why did you initiate me into this unknown oath without my consent?" Tony's response came with a solemn resolve, tinged with regret for the situation he had unwittingly brought Wilson into. "Arguably, Wilson, it was with your consent. I told you from the outset that once you entered into this, there would be no going back. But you consented. Wilson, Tanuku is a god of wealth. He has the power to change your situation with a snap of his fingers. Don't you want to be rich? Don't you want to live lavishly like this?" Tony gestured around them, indicating his mansion and the symbols of success it represented. "Look at me, Wilson. Tanuku has changed my life, and this is what you need." Wilson stood there, holding the black handkerchief tightly in his hand, its smooth fabric a stark reminder of the pact he had unknowingly entered into. His gaze was fixed on the intricate pattern woven into the cloth, but his thoughts were consumed by regret and apprehension. Wilson's emotions were a turbulent mix of hope and anger as he turned to Tony, clutching the black handkerchief tightly. "Tony," Wilson began, his voice tinged with urgency, "what are the instructions? What am I supposed to do with this handkerchief?" "I don't know, Tony," Wilson replied, his voice tinged with uncertainty. "The instructions differ. The handkerchief will direct you." Wilson's frustration boiled over as he confronted Tony with a deep-seated anger that had been building since their conversation began. "What do you mean you don't know, Tony?" "That is the truth, Wilson. I don't have all the answers," Tony admitted. Wilson's frustration and confusion reached a breaking point as Tony's admission sank in. Without another word, he turned abruptly, his mind a whirlwind of anger and fear. He hurried towards the door, his steps echoing in the quiet hallway of Tony's mansion. But just as Wilson's hand touched the door handle, Tony's voice cut through the air with urgency. "Wilson, wait." Wilson froze, his back still turned to Tony, his heart pounding with a mixture of defiance and apprehension. Wilson's silence spoke volumes as he turned away from Tony without a word. With a swift motion, he pulled the door open and stormed out, the cool breeze offering a stark contrast to the turmoil raging within him. That night, Wilson found himself unable to sleep, consumed by a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions that refused to settle. The events of the evening replayed in his mind like a haunting refrain: the conversation with Tony, the revelation of the pact with Tanuku, and the unsettling realization that his life had taken a sudden and dangerous turn. As Wilson stood frozen in his apartment, the sudden whirlwind intensified, paper swirling like angry spirits and the floor quaking beneath him. Panic gripped his chest as he stumbled backward into a corner, heart pounding against the walls of his ribcage. In the midst of the chaos, a chilling presence emerged from the shadows, a spectral figure with an unearthly glow and a single, ominous horn protruding from its forehead. Wilson's breath caught in his throat as he stared, wide-eyed and trembling, unable to comprehend the terrifying sight before him. Before he could make sense of the chaos, a deep, guttural voice reverberated through the room, sending a primal shiver down Wilson's spine. "I am the messenger of the great Tenuku, the god of wealth," it intoned, each word dripping with a malevolent authority that froze Wilson in place. "You have invoked the pact. You have accepted the terms, and now you must fulfill them. For the wealth you seek, you must possess intimate knowledge of your mother. And wipe your manhood with a handkerchief. Then will you experience the wealth you desire." The spirit I narrowed, its spectral form flickering with an unsettling intensity. "There is no turning back," it declared with finality. "You have chosen this path. Now, fulfill your oath or face the consequences. You have 2 nights or you die." A mix of horror and disbelief washed over Wilson. Such a command was unthinkable, an abomination that defied all he held sacred. His mind raced, rejecting the notion even as fear coiled in his chest. Just as Wilson summoned his courage to defy the abhorrent command, the spirit's presence began to fade. Its malevolent gaze lifted from him, leaving behind an eerie silence that hung heavy in the air. Wilson stood alone in the suffocating stillness, his mind reeling with disbelief and relief. What have I done?" Wilson's voice cracked as he spoke aloud, the words barely escaping his lips. His mind raced with images of his mother, Agatha, the woman who had sacrificed endlessly to give him a chance at a better life. "My God, what have I put myself into?" Wilson whispered, his voice quivering with horror and revulsion. "Having a carnal knowledge of my own mother. It's an abomination. I can't do this." The words hung heavy in the air, laden with the unbearable weight of the command he had received. The mere thought of such a depraved act, betraying his mother in such a vile manner, turned his stomach and twisted his soul. But as he sat there, grappling with the unimaginable choice, another chilling realization clawed at his thoughts. The messenger had warned him, defy the command, and he would face death within 2 days. The specter's threat loomed over him like a dark cloud, casting a shadow of impending doom. As dawn broke, Wilson lay in bed with a heavy heart, the reality of the penalty awaiting him sinking in. He knew he couldn't go through with the messenger's abhorrent demand. The thought of betraying his mother, Agatha, filled him with a profound sense of shame and sorrow. With a deep sigh, Wilson rose from his bed, his movements slow and deliberate. He packed a few belongings into a small bag, his mind racing with thoughts of escape and redemption. The city of Lagos, with its promises and pitfalls, no longer held any allure for him. His only sanctuary, his only refuge, lay in the comforting embrace of his village. Wilson arrived in the village with a heavy heart, the weight of his recent ordeal still pressing upon him. As he approached the familiar sights and sounds of home, he couldn't shake the turmoil that had accompanied him from Lagos. Each step seemed to carry the burden of his decision, and uncertainty gnawed at his resolve. As Wilson arrived home, worn out from the journey and weighed down by his recent struggles, Agatha greeted him with open arms and a heart full of love. "Wilson." Agatha's voice carried a mix of happiness and concern as she rushed forward to embrace him. Wrapping her arms around him tightly, she held him close, the warmth of her motherly affection enveloping him like a comforting blanket. That evening, Agatha poured her love into preparing a delicious dinner for Wilson. The kitchen was filled with the inviting aroma of home-cooked meals, a tangible expression of her care and longing for her son's presence. After a hearty dinner filled with warmth and love, as the night settled in and the dishes were cleared away, Agatha gently kissed Wilson on the forehead and bid him good night. "Good night, my dear," Agatha said softly, her voice filled with maternal affection. "It's been a long day. You should get some rest." "Actually, Mom," he began tentatively, "I think I'll stay up for a little while longer," Wilson replied. As Agatha retired to her room, bidding Wilson good night with a tender smile, Wilson's mind was consumed by a tumultuous mix of emotions. His thoughts heavy with sadness at the intent of the abomination required of him. With each passing moment, the urgency of his predicament grew more palpable. Fear and uncertainty gripped his heart as he considered the unthinkable choice he faced. The prospect of sacrificing his principles. With a heavy heart and a mind swelling with fear and uncertainty, Wilson summoned every ounce of courage he could muster. He rose from his seat in the dimly lit farmhouse, his steps deliberate yet hesitant as he made his way to his mother's room. The wood cool against his fingertips as he turned the doorknob. "Wilson." Agatha's voice was gentle, tinged with concern. "Is everything all right? Do you need anything?" But before she could realize what was going on, Wilson was already close to her, pants down.